The simple answer is alcohol is metabolized just like fat, so therefore it goes to storage. So the more alcohol, the more you store.
This is the Vance Crow Podcast.
Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. I'm glad you're here. This week, I spoke with Connie Diekman, a nutrition and dietetics expert. We jump into all sorts of topics, including how does a dietitian view the ketogenic diet, and what is alcohol's impact on your body if you're trying to lose weight. And we even talked about how insulin works with somebody that has diabetes. It was a far-ranging interview, and I was glad Connie was willing to sit down. So I hope you enjoy this interview, and if you do, I hope you'll hit that like button and consider subscribing. And if you know of any other experts that I should be talking with, make sure you put it in the comments below. Connie Diekman, welcome to the podcast. I'm glad you could be here. You are actually nutrition and dietetics royalty. As I was looking up your background, you've been on Oprah and the Good Morning America show, but then even more than that, actually probably a little bit more prestigious as than just the media, is that you were the president of the big Academy for Nutrition and Dietetics. So how does one go from being just a regular dietitian to becoming president of the Academy?
Lots of blood, sweat, and tears. How's that? Lots of years of dedication, lots of years of volunteering your time, lots of years of, I want to make the profession better, and I want the public, which we haven't done real well with, I want the public to better understand the importance of good nutrition.
And so why don't we, maybe a good place to start is, what is your profession? There are a lot of people that are out there that are talking about food, and I can tell you how to eat a nutritious meal, but what is your profession, and why does this make you different than just the woman with a really great blog?
What a perfect way to start this. The key, if you want the nutrition expert, is to look for a registered dietitian. And the reason I say that is when you see that RD, or in some states you will see an RDN, registered dietitian nutritionist. In the state of Missouri, we're not yet licensed as LDNs, we're licensed as LDs, licensed dietitians. So we still tend to use our RD credential in this state, but you'll see either one. The key to the credential is there's 4 years bachelor degree behind it. There's a dietetic internship where you went out there and experienced and practiced and learned. And then every 5 years, we have to continue our education. And we have to document that we have done continuing education. So it's the credential ensures you of what you're going to get. Whereas if someone is a nutritionist, who knows? Who knows? Do they have an education? Did they just read a book? Did they just like the sound of that word? So looking for that RD is really important if people want to get nutrition advice that looks at their needs, the body of scientific evidence, and then develops a plan.
Okay, so if you have, how many people are in the Academy?
We're about 100,000 throughout the country.
100,000. Okay, so this brings up an interesting question. If you have 100,000 people that are commissioned or registered, do they all think the same thing?
We don't. Science is constantly evolving. One of the strong things about registered dietitians is we do base our practice on the science, the body of evidence. But if you go look at science, what we knew yesterday and what we'll know in 20 years likely are going to be different because it's constantly building on itself, and it's how you interpret it. The core of every registered dietitian is going to be the same, but how they interpret it might change. So in other words, we might look at the issue of fat because that remains a hot topic. And guidelines from the American government currently say we need to focus more on what we call unsaturated fats, so oils, nuts, fatty fish, and less on fatty meats, cheeses, whole milk. Some people may look at that and say, well, less means I could eat more of those things if I really watched how much fruits and vegetables I eat because I'm not getting fats from other fats, so it's still less. So it's that subtle interpretation. I like to look at it more as this. If we sat down and you said, help me develop a plan that is healthier for me, we'd start with where are you now? what changes do we need to make to achieve healthier? And then we talk about how you make those. So you might say, and I've had clients say this to me, I cannot do skim milk. I don't care what you say. I will not drink it. Okay, fine. Then what fat do we give up so that you can still have your 2% or whole milk, but keep your fat at a healthy level?
Okay, so, I think it's kind of an interesting profession to go into food, right? Or to go into nutrition, because in a lot of ways, it's very clear whatever you eat is the fuel that you put into your body. It's what makes up all your cells. When you take on the mantle of, I'm going to help you learn how to eat, you are actually taking on, like, I'm going to tell you about the very core of life. Do you, when you were starting out, what were you thinking you were getting into, and how did it end up being different than what you thought?
I think when I started, the focus was very much on the role of diet and disease. So it was more about either how do we prevent it, but probably more about, okay, now you have hypertension, what do we do with it? I started my career at Washington University Med School doing lipid research. So it was really about somebody who had a high cholesterol, how do we help them get better? Over the years, it's become clear that piece is obviously key because we know it can work. But what has become more important is, why don't we prevent the disease part? And let's talk basic nutrition and hopefully delay the disease piece so you don't have the 40-year-old male who's had a heart attack. Now he's 60 or 70 before he has that first one. So that's probably the biggest change, except, of course, the other big change called social media, which has resulted in almost everybody who puts food in their mouth thinking they're a nutrition expert.
And what leads you to believe that they're not?
What leads me to believe they're not? I think a lot of the things, number one, of course, is that they can't support their claim with a credential or the education. And I say that or because it's important, and American Society of Nutrition is finishing up their meeting actually right now as we speak. And that's a group of PhD scientists who are all in the field of nutrition. So you may not have RDs on everyone's name in that group, but they're doing the research. They got that PhD in. So they're, you do have that group who certainly is active in social media. But when you look out there on social media, really it is. Look for what is their claim to fame, so to speak. Is it simply, again, they learned how to do a really good blog, or they wrote a book, or, do they have that credential piece?
So let's talk about what happens. So if you're a dietitian, just for somebody that's never even heard that this is a career before, you've gone through your education, you've done your clinic rotations, and now you've gone out into the world to take a job. What jobs are there out there for a dietitian?
Well, that's the greatest news, is we really have a core of education that allows us to do many, many things. And granted, my career has been long, so I have a lot of colleagues who have seen their careers grow as well. But you look at dietitians, a colleague was president of one of our local community colleges. You have dietitians in the PR world who are working with food companies to position their messages. You have dietitians who are in the sports arena. You have dietitians who are the dietitian for the teams, whether it's cross our fingers and so forth and so on for the Blues, or whether it's the Cardinals or whomever. Dietitians are helping those athletes be the best athletes they can. What are the other opportunities? The opportunities are really, I tell interns and or students all the time, your opportunities are only limited by what you want to find. Because food is, think about it, food is disease, the athlete, the older adult. Look at the opportunity in the baby boomers aging and keeping them healthy. Again, the PR type thing. So there's lots out there.
So let's talk about the older people, right? So as they get older, things change in their body?
Right.
Do they need to eat differently than
Yeah.
a 35-year-old?
Yeah. Yeah, we do know, and we've always known that as we age, we lose muscle from the age of 30 on. Muscle mass declines every decade from that point on.
Even if you lift?
Yep. Yep.
Wow.
And what it means is you've got to work harder to maintain what you've got. And it's basically a function of aging of the tissues. It's just the way the body's metabolism is working. Now, that doesn't mean you can't get benefit from lifting. Don't get me wrong. The older adults should be lifting as much as when they were young, so as to maintain that. There's a disorder called sarcopenia, which is basically a muscle wasting that occurs with age. And you can delay and or prevent that by working out. The falls that older adults have, those often are a result of failure to keep that muscle mass. So what that, of course, means is you're looking at trying to get more quality nutrients in fewer calories, because as we age, our metabolism slows. So we can't eat as much. So it's kind of a tricky combination.
As you were talking about calories, and then you're also talking about preserving muscle mass, I found myself about 2 years ago being a little bit pissed off because I felt like I'd been told a lot about nutrition and food pyramids and food plates, but nobody had ever made the observation that proteins, carbs, and fats are related to calories. That if you have 1 gram of protein, you have 4 calories, and same with carbohydrates, and then 9 calories for every gram of fat. No one had ever pointed that out. Right? So to me, those concepts were totally divorced, and because they were divorced, they didn't mean anything to me. If I turned a box around and looked at it and said, "Oh, okay, it has high protein and low fat, that's probably good," but no connection there. Right. Why in the world does that simple concept, why is that not ubiquitous? Why did it take me being in my 30s to learn that?
Unfortunately, we really don't teach health and or nutrition in school. We teach science, we teach biology. You get that, of course, middle school and on, not the younger years. I think the good news is what we're beginning to see, and it's still slow, is preschool and younger kids learning, as you said, my plate and why these things are important. They're likely not taking it to the protein, fat, carb. I look at my granddaughters, one is 7, the other's 4. They wouldn't understand those concepts. But they definitely know that it's important to eat fruits and vegetables. It's important to eat some grain foods. They know the protein piece. They're not good eaters there, which is not uncommon with young kids. But, it's something we need to teach as a part of life. Again, it probably goes back to, if you look at what we talked about first up, dietetics it truly started in 1917 as a part of the war. It started in Cleveland.
Really?
Yep. It was all about feeding our soldiers.
World War I.
Yep.
So what happened? So we were saying our soldiers don't have good nutrition?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And in Cleveland, a group of women came together and talked about how they could develop the association. They had been working with soldiers, and that's how they came to be at that time, the American Dietetic Association.
And how did it go? How did they do?
Well, we're now 102 years old, so I guess it went okay. But it became the beginning of recognizing the importance of fuel for health. But again, it tended to be related to, the soldiers in the hospital where they made the biggest impact in the war. And that's that disease connection until, I don't know, it's certainly we talked prevention as I started out, but it really was much more disease. It's been the last, what would that be, 30 to 40 years that we've gone, let's talk prevention and disease to hopefully make a difference, which then hopefully means we can get it into the schools.
So going back to the proteins, carbs, fats, and then calories, there's an adage that people hear, and I'm not so sure that people understand what it means, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts on it. Calories in, calories out. Yeah. Can we do some test on a person and say this is about the number of calories you need to get, and if you get that, you're going to be approximately this weight?
We can do that. It won't happen. Yes, there is a test that can do that. It will measure, respiration, your body temperature, and all of these things. And it won't happen, though, because of the cost piece, and no one's going to be able to justify doing it. So we still are operating under approximations. We still are operating under, okay, you're this tall, you weigh this much, you do this much activity, let's see where we go from there. The whole calories in, calories out continues to be a point of conversation because there is something different.
Point of conversation. That was a very polite way to put it. You're saying there's a little bit of conflict there among dietitians.
Amongst a lot of people, not just amongst dietitians.
So there's debate as to whether or not calories in, calories out is a real thing.
Calories in, calories out is probably a real thing. The question is, what are the calories? In other words, do you burn the same kind of calories as I do?
Interesting.
Can we calculate your need the same way we calculate mine?
Meaning that maybe I burn proteins and carbs faster than another person?
Yeah. Yep. And it all has to do with our metabolisms, which, of course, if you think about it, we all are unique. Our metabolism is not the same amongst all of us. It all functions differently. And sure, we can, and that's what the science has been based upon, is we estimate it based upon men have more muscle mass, therefore they burn more and they need more. Women, once they reach menopause, burn even less than men because they have less muscle than men do. So you can make those kind of basic things. But the question marks are, why is it that some people will consume a lower calorie intake and they can't lose any weight? Other people can eat as many calories as they want, and they can't gain weight. Something's different in the way in which all of our bodies function, which is why, of course, so many of us were so excited that when we got the DNA genetic mapping done, we'd have the answer, and we'd be able to make your diet, your diet, your diet. Hasn't worked that way quite yet.
Why not?
Good question. I don't know that we know why not. There is no question in my mind as a dietitian that our bodies are just very complex. You look at, and this is the thing that we remind consumers all the time, this is a bag of chemistry. It's a bag of chemical reactions. And they all happen, of course, differently. Think about it. When you put them in a chemistry lab, they don't all work at the same pace every single time. So does it make a difference? And we know there is a difference. If you put a lot of fiber in the body, in your diet, the way it gets digested slows down the absorption of other nutrients. So it may aid nutrient absorption in some people, in other people it goes right through them. So there's those kind of variables. And then, of course, the big question mark right now is the gut microbiome. And that's a big question mark.
So I'm really happy to go in that direction, but I'm interested really in this variability. I have a good friend named Rob Long that often compares like nutrition or dietitians' work to macroeconomics, right? So on the micro level, we know supply and demand, but as soon as you start stacking global trade and weather and all the things that are required to make macroeconomics work, it becomes a little bit of like the dark arts, right?
Yeah.
We think that this is what's going to happen. And I think that that's got to be a challenge in your world, that you take this bag of biochemical reactions and you add on there, psychology of how are people making decisions and other. So is this going to be a solvable problem, or will it be that we're always on the path and we're getting a little more directionally accurate all the time?
Hard question, because of course it's all about that biology piece. But what I like to think is that it is about us as registered dietitians working with each individual we see and not making assumptions for all of them. So in other words, it's really listening to what you do. If you say, and I think back to, the clients or students over the years, if they say they work out every day for 60 minutes and, they can't seem to either build muscle mass or lose weight, depending upon their goal. All right, let's talk about that workout. What are you doing? Oh, well, I lift. Okay, well, how much are you lifting? Oh, about 3 pounds. Okay, well, now let's revisit where we're going. Oh, it's 30 pounds. Okay. So the variables, which of course is your comparison piece, there's so many variables involved.
Oh, yeah. And you can have people that are lifting that in between each set. They're wandering around talking to somebody.
Yeah,
And then you have
exactly.
other people that are just cranking on it as hard as they can.
Exactly. And the same thing with the cardio piece, which of course is where the calorie burn really comes from. So if somebody's really trying to lose, if they're on that treadmill and they're only going at a, 2-mile pace, it's going to take you a long time. You'll get there, but you're going to have to go a whole lot longer than if you're out running or, the person who's walking faster and all of that. So we as registered dietitians have to look at the whole picture. That was one of the things that I enjoyed most with my career. I moved from the WashU Med School, so it was one-on-one patient, to private practice where I could work one-on-one with, to the university where I could work one-on-one. So we could really talk. Tell me about what you're doing, what you want to do, how you want to do, so that we could set a plan that hopefully was individualized as opposed to, here, let me give you this tear sheet. And I think that's what we have to recognize is there's some limitations. Not everybody can take that kind of time with patients. You look at patients in the hospital, 15 minutes with the dietitian. You look at patients in a doctor's office. How long do you get to spend with your doctor?
Oh, I mean, if you're with a doctor for 8 minutes, and
There
frankly,
you go.
if they sat and spent that time talking about my nutrition as opposed to my blood work, I'm going to be pissed off because I'm going to be like, hey, we're here to talk about something else.
Right.
And whether or not that's the right thing, I don't know, but that's definitely the way humans behave.
Yeah. And so, consequently, I think, unfortunately, we do fall into the pattern of, as you said, okay, you need to eat this many calories or you need to eat this much protein, which is why fad diets are so popular because they seem to be the answer. Here, just do this and everything will be fine. They just don't work that way.
So if everybody is individualized, then how in the world can the government put together a food pyramid or a plate that's going to make sense to the masses, to 330 million Americans?
It is definitely challenging. The good news is we have a process, even though this was questioned in 2015. We have a process that very clearly outlines, you put together a scientific committee. That committee reviews the body of evidence. That's an important statement. And just today, I got an email from a colleague who heard me speak a couple weeks ago. And her question today was, I just came across this study. It seems to contradict what you said. What do you think? Single studies add to the body of evidence. Single studies don't make the evidence. So the committee reviews the body of evidence to see what is it people need to eat to be healthy. And it's very clear. The guidelines are about for health. People don't always hear that part.
You're saying that they're not necessarily about this will help you lose weight or this will help you,
Right.
Put up better cleans
Right.
and deadlifts or okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. It's about population health, which is what's tricky. And somebody said this just recently because the 2020 committee is meeting the dietary guidelines get done every 5 years. So the 2020 committee has started meeting. Their second meeting is in July.
Does the science move that fast every 5? Do you think they should be meeting every 5 years?
They probably should be meeting more often.
Really?
Oh, science is constant. That's the confusion piece. Because right now, well, number one, we still are in an environment where for researchers it's called publish or perish. So, of course, nowadays with the competition, publish means you got to be doing something, cranking it out. So we have a lot of science every day. But we need the body of evidence, and that's why the 5 years works.
And when they come together, what do they do?
So they look at population health, they look at, what do we need to do to go forward, and then they go through the science that has occurred since the last time. So they tend not to go back, to 2010, 2000. It's since 15 what has transpired. And then based upon that body of evidence, they come up with their report, which then goes on to Department of Health and Human Services and the Food and Drug Administration. They create the guidelines.
And those are a group of scientists or a group of bureaucrats or who does that? Have you been a part of the scientific committee that was putting
No,
forward
I have
recommendations?
testified in front of the committee, but I've never been on the committee.
And so when you say testify, they bring you
Yeah.
forward, and what kind of questions do they ask you?
You can come forward at different meetings. They post it. Anybody can do it. You make a request to testify at meetings that are open to the public, and I've testified in support of healthier fats. I've testified in support of, what was the other time? I'm drawing a blank on the other time. I've done it twice, but again, it's open to the public, so you get some interesting people. Do you know who Mary Lou Henner is?
No,
She's an actress.
Okay.
She's one of those people who, what's it called, where they can remember everything.
Okay,
You know,
like a photographic memory kind of thing.
And they can say in 2000 on June, I don't even know what today is.
Oh, okay.
And
Yeah.
they can tell you what happened
Right.
that day. But she also speaks mainly in terms of a verse, in terms of a poem. She's very interesting. She testified the last time. So see, it can be anything from to.
And did she speak in verse and poem?
Yes, she did. She did. She did. That's who she is. So the committee is charged with the body of evidence, and the committee is charged with putting together this report that says, okay, the evidence indicates this, 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 and this. This time, the committee is looking at some very specific questions. In the past, they kind of looked at the whole. The whole is getting big. So this time, they're looking at, this is the first time, 2020 will be the first time we have guidelines for birth to 2. We've always been from 2 forward, because the birth to 2-year-old, that's a very different population than the rest of the population. But this time they're looking at that age group. They're looking again at fat, specifically saturated fat. So they will review the body of evidence, make their recommendations, and then we go from there.
And you're big into unsaturated nut fats, is that right? So talk about that for a little bit.
Fat seems to be where I spent much of my career, yeah. So, I started out in lipid research where we did a cardiovascular study. So I really have always been into the science of types of fats, quantity of fat. And over the years, it's morphed depending upon, what I'm doing with the rest of my career at that point. You're, I guess, referencing the Superfood Nuts book that I wrote a couple years ago with the chef. And it was an interesting, and it's a good book. It is about using nuts as a replacement for whether it's your meat, whether it is as an appetizer. The chef was a very good chef. She really did some nice things that you weren't just throwing nuts on a plate. You really felt like, oh, I could do this. And so, I obviously spoke the science of nuts from the standpoint of the fat composition, because that's what's important. The quality of fat is what we've got to look at, the quality of fat. Sure, quantity is an issue in terms of calories, to your point of earlier. But if you're eating all that saturated fat, not only are you getting the calories, but your impact on your heart is not very good.
So there is a new trend. I'll see if you've heard of this before. Are you familiar
Probably.
with sous vide cooking?
Yeah.
So have
Yeah.
you seen how there is now a movement to make your steak and put nut butters on top of it in order to cook with it?
I have not seen
It
that.
is fascinating. I've watched probably 2 or 3 hours of people enjoying
that
it, and
right?
I've not yet done it. But I wondered because this is definitely a movement where the
Yeah.
nut market is moving into.
Yeah, well, and it is definitely, we as a population tend to look at nuts as a snack food, period. We don't know what else to do with them. And what was nice about doing this book with the chef was she demonstrated, well, no, because she wouldn't have used meat, because she really tried to keep everything on the vegetarian side. But how can you get nuts as a part of what you do, as opposed to, how am I going to get those in my diet?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not 100% convinced that it isn't a trick to get me to sous vide a steak with peanut butter on it. But so you had mentioned earlier fad diets, and I think an interesting way to look at fad diets is I heard a speaker named Naval Ravikant, and he was on a podcast called The Joe Rogan Experience. And during the podcast, he said, all people want 3 things. They want to be happy, wealthy, and fit. And if they have those three things, or if they imagine those three things, that is what they want. And I think that when we talk about fad diets, a lot of the reason that people are so attracted to them is because it has a promise of that third pillar of being fit. When you as a dietitian hear about fad diets, you're hearing like, hey, this is not a thing that's going to work. But tell me more. Open that up more for me.
Well, fad diets, just from their term, of course, fads are short-term things that come and go. Whether it's the mini skirt or whether it's the keto diet. Fad diets are not something that last. There might be principles in a lot of them that people can work with and hold on to develop a lifestyle routine, but the thing that worries me, or worries is the wrong word, the thing that upsets me, I guess, is I've seen too many people go from one to the next, to the next, to the next. Almost always, the weight loss goes up in between, comes back down, goes up even more, comes back down. But the bottom line is they either start out exactly where they end up exactly where they started, or they weigh more. And nothing is more demoralizing than that experience. And that, to me, isn't fair, that you would promise, here, if you do this diet, you'll get, because it isn't going to do that. Because you can't live without the things you love. And most fad diets cause you to do that. So, when you look at the concept behind them, I think a great example is the Atkins diet, which, was around when I was in school.
I had a roommate that went on the Atkins diet. It was great because every time I walked through the kitchen, I got some bacon. And then I was not on the diet, but it seemed like a really good situation for me.
You liked it. But if it worked, why did it go away and come back and go away and come back? We've got to find, again, it gets back to that issue of we've got to look at the body of evidence of what it takes to be healthy. To your point on the podcast, health was one of those three variables. And how do we achieve that in a way in which you're happy? Because if you don't like what you're eating, if you got to cut out your favorite food, whether it's you got to cut out the bacon because you're going vegetarian, or whether it's you got to cut out the bread because you're going Atkins, keto, so forth, and that's your favorite food, I'll bet you it's not going to last.
It seems to me that it'd be very easy to point and say, well, the reason that those people didn't succeed is because they don't have discipline. Why is that not accurate? Is it that they why is that not an accurate thing? Because I don't hear you saying that.
It's sure that's a little bit of it. In other words, they couldn't keep it up. But likely the bigger issue is they couldn't keep it up because it wasn't enjoyable. My thing whenever I talk to any of the students, any of the clients, some of the project work that I'm doing right now, food is meant to be enjoyed. So that's our first, do we agree? And then let's go from there in terms of how do we make that healthy for you. Whereas some of the fad diets, it's really about, nope, this is good, this is bad, you can't eat this, you must eat that. That's more of a mandate as opposed to your freedom of choice. That's what bothers me.
So this morning I was listening to some nutrition podcasts just to see what's the state of nutrition podcasts, and I found one where both of them uniformly agreed that they hated diets. And I found myself being really frustrated with two dietitians saying that, because on some level, if you have to have rules, right? And a diet is just a set of heuristics. It's saying, stay within these parameters and you should achieve this outcome. So if you have dietitians that are saying, I hate diets, how do you square that circle?
Yeah. It's a tricky one. The anti-diet dietitians, it's a moniker. It's a gimmick. You watched 2 podcasts, so it worked. The reality is, diet is the food you put in your mouth to live.
Right.
So if their premise is I'm anti-diet, does that mean they as registered dietitians are not equipped to help their clients understand what they need to eat to be healthy?
Well, I should be fair to them because they
No,
started talking about things like intuitive dieting and things like that. So
Yeah.
did I find crazy people online, or did I find?
No, it's another movement. Intuitive eating has been around, and if you look at behavior counseling,
So what is intuitive eating? I
Intuitive
remember where I
eating.
was running when I heard it, but that's about all I knew.
Intuitive eating is eating to the point at which you recognize you're full, not paying attention to good, bad, not paying attention to I can't have bacon, but eating bacon, but only eating the one slice, and so it's an intent to be more normalized of your eating as opposed to thinking about your eating. And what some of the dietitians who are in that space are trying to work towards is we're seeing more and more disordered eating in this country.
Really?
Yeah.
That's on the increase.
Yeah. And diagnosed eating disorders are going up as well. The question marks always when you see those kind of things are they really going up, or are we just
now
diagnosing?
Yeah, okay.
And many of the researchers will tell you it's a little bit of both. That they're now socially acceptable, so they're getting diagnosed, but then there is a little bit of an increase.
Okay, fair enough.
So they're in that space where their premise is that our talk about diet, good foods, bad foods, can eat, can't eat, is causing the disordered eating and or the eating disorders. We don't have the evidence to support that yet. And in fact, some of the position papers out of the academy indicate that is not a cause effect. There's biology behind people who have eating disorders. Clinically diagnosed anorexia, bulimia, even the eating disorders not otherwise specified. There's clinical diagnosis there.
And a lot of times those have something to do with food, but they're much more about control.
It's the
and
psychological.
There's a lot of other things going on there. It's not just people wanting to be fit.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And that's what we have to be careful of as we talk about this. And there's been a lot of, again, conversation professionally about this use of the term anti-diet, because that is putting a moniker on that indicates we shouldn't be talking about. What do you need to eat to be healthy? What are the key parameters within an eating plan that are going to allow you to build muscle mass, allow that athlete to recover better, all of those things. So again, it's likely the social media space is huge. It's one more way to get yourself out there. People don't want to talk about diets. So in that respect, it's good. But we need to talk about healthy eating.
Yeah, and it's such a challenge because with regards to food, that has its roots in every aspect of our lives. I mean, all the way from religion to celebration to, so I think that you have like a really, really tough situation being in dietetics at all. But now in the age of social media, I would imagine it'd be even more difficult.
It is more difficult because, again, anybody can be in social media. There's no credential you have to get to be in social media, and therefore you can talk about whatever you want to talk about, and the consumer can't tell the difference. So the confusion is significant. And then the other thing is, as you said, because food is a part of everything we do, and it has a value. Food really has value. From the standpoint of, what was the reward you got when you got your first A in grade school? Or, what is it that the family always serves on the special holiday or your birthday? That's a value piece that in many ways ties into who you are as a person.
Yeah, I mean, there's very few countries that don't have a national dish, something that's
right.
that's deeply personal to them.
That's exactly right. And it's so important that we remember that piece because, again, if you start talking, whether it's talking diet or talking anti-diet, but all of a sudden you interlope on, no, that's important to me, or no, that's my value system, you've lost that client. So we really do have to remember, it is psychological. There's no question there. I know I had an experience, and I had a student recently share a similar experience. And now I'm drawing a blank on the students, but mine basically I'll never forget. As a young child, I don't even remember how old, but young, ate cream of wheat for breakfast, got sick after breakfast. I cannot look at cream of wheat since that day. I mean, that's a psychological connection that we draw to food. So you've got that, and then of course you've got the psychological from the standpoint of individuals viewing how their body looks and what food does to their body, and the whole eating disorder perception, and then the value piece, and of course then we get into the economic component.
When I was living in Kenya, I had a very interesting experience that really kind of jarred me. And it was, we had been doing this homestay visit where you're staying with these various families. And so all the Peace Corps volunteers are within one kind of village. And at the end of it, to say thank you, the Peace Corps volunteers, because the reason that you live with these families is so they can teach you how to live in Kenya. How do you take a bucket bath? How do you eat using the ingredients that are there? How do you operate, right? So at the end of this training session, we all got together to cook food for our families. So they all come together and we have this kind of like outdoor picnic, and we make the best foods that we can think of, and we have money to put towards this. So we're buying the highest quality things from the market. We even make guacamole there, and which they had not had before. They had never thought to mix avocados with peppers and onions and things. So we were making a joke that someday we'll come back and that'll be the national dish of Kenya.
Yeah.
But we get all the way done, and we had goat and all kinds of things. And we get all the way done, and the people were like, okay, where's the ugali? And we were like, what? And ugali is this ground corn with oil and water. And they were like, I'm a Kenyan. I have not eaten unless I've eaten ugali.
Oh, wow. There you go.
And the reason that they did it, after thinking about it for a long time, is this was during famine, during hard times, they had to have this pace. They ate it really late at night, which would be completely opposite of the United States. You eat it, you feel full, you go to bed. You don't need to have that many calories. You're just pumping in filler.
Yep. It allows you to be able to sleep. Yeah. No, and I think that's exactly what we in this country forget about, because we're fortunate. Food insecurity is on the rise, but as a whole, we don't have issues with food availability and ability to purchase and all of that. So we forget that food has a lot of meaning / value that goes well beyond, oh, that tasted good. And when you talk to people in terms of making diet changes, you have to remember those things. You cannot impose my stuff on you because you're not me. I can share the science, I can share the ideas, I can share the suggestions, but it has to be, as your example just said there, it has to be what works for them.
Yeah, and I think that's another reason why the fad diets work so well, is because they're not really presented as science. They're presented as a story of change. I had this problem, so I picked this thing up, and it really helped me. And you mentioned one that I wanted to bring up with you, and because I had a chance to attend the California Academy and give a talk there.
Oh, yeah.
And so while I was there, I sat in on a bunch of different talks, and I saw one on the ketogenic diet. So I thought, here, I'm going to go and I'm going to learn all about this. And actually what I stumbled my way into was an hour-long lecture on how ketosis can help prevent some seizures. And it blew my mind that everyone in there wasn't thinking how to lose weight, right? They were thinking of it for its original purpose. So talk a little bit about, what is the ketogenic diet? Where did it come from? And what do you think about it being an active part of of American diet right now?
Yeah. Basically, the keto diet, as you said, it's putting the body into a state of ketosis, and when the body is in a state of ketosis, it forces it to burn fat to help fuel the body. There's two problems with that.
And the way that it does it is that the people don't have carbohydrates at the ready access.
Yeah.
So once they've burned off all their glycogen through exercise or just through time,
they don't consume enough. They stay at a carb somewhere in the ballpark of 50 grams max, I think, and it could even be lower than that. And to give you an example of what that looks like, 2 pieces of bread and a piece of fruit is about 45.
Okay.
So that's whole day.
And for anybody that wants to know about the physiology of it, when you're eating carbohydrates, your body stores that as very quick energy. And so when you're going for a run or something like that, that's where you're getting your energy. Until you get past 35, 40, 50 minutes of hardcore exercise, are you able to get into burning other things other than just the carbs stored in your muscle?
Yeah, the glycogen that we store in the muscle, which is carbohydrates converted to its storage farm, is there to fuel us in between meals. That's the bottom line. Now, you referenced the exercise piece, but it really is there so that, our blood sugar doesn't drop too low. Blood sugar is what keeps us going. When you look at your glucose levels, blood sugar levels, that's the fuel that the body's operating under. And what you have to stop and think is, okay, it fuels the muscle. Biggest muscle in the body. Well, that would be the heart. So it's what keeps the body fueled. The brain cannot store glucose. So the brain needs a constant infusion, which again is why we need to eat on a regular basis.
That's why people get hangry when when they're out of the food. They start getting that brain fog and kind of
There's just no glucose
I've never
going,
heard it described
and that's
this
why
way.
they make it referred to as the keto flu, because you get that kind of lethargic, nauseous feeling as that blood sugar is dropping way down here, as opposed to what I always said to the students, you want your blood sugar to kind of do this all day long. Obviously, that's not exactly what it does, but that's what you want. You do not want the roller coaster, because every time you roller coaster, that's where two things happen. One, you get that, let me think. I think I just read this sentence 8 times. Let me think if I can read it again. That kind of disconnect, right? But you also get that, oh my God, I'm hungry. What is there to eat? I'll eat whatever I can find. And of course, we overeat. So what the principle of the keto diet is to deplete the body of that carb by not consuming enough. So now you force it to move into burning fat for fuel. But the problem with that is fat won't go to glucose. And the body wants glucose. So fat goes to a form that creates these ketone bodies. And when you can get into a state of ketosis, measure your ketones in your urine, it's like, oh good, I'm where I need to be. I'm going to burn all this fat and lose all this weight. What's happening though is you're burning muscle, because you will take anything that's in that muscle for fuel before you go to ketones.
Oh.
You also, when you consume that much protein, which many of those diets are very, very high, there's a limit to how much protein at one meal we can metabolize and use. And anything beyond that,
what do you think it is?
Gone.
40, 45 grams?
We're kind of at I was just at a talk a couple weeks ago, and the speaker actually alluded to that it's 30 to 40, whereas some of the researchers I've heard have said 30 max at a meal.
Oh man, there's a whole lot of whey protein being urinated out of people's systems.
Correct.
Then. Okay.
Which of course goes to the other way. You're losing weight. You're losing a lot of fluid, getting rid of that wasted protein. So the keto diet also does sort of a dry you out, because the high protein is a diuretic. Carbohydrates, of course, they keep us hydrated.
Oh God, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Okay, this is good.
Protein's a diuretic.
Okay, wow.
So the high protein, you're losing not only the waste, because we can't use, if we don't need the amino acids that are in protein, that's really why we eat it, is the amino acids in it. Okay, so protein is made up of all those amino acids, and we need those. If we don't need them, we take the nitrogen off of them, and that's waste. So you're losing all of that, which of course also ties in to when you get that kind of not very nice breath with the keto diet. It's all about the fat burn, the protein waste. It's all about what the body's doing to try to keep you alive when it's not getting the nutrients it needs.
So it would sound to me that you are not a big fan of the keto diet
Very
to lose
good.
weight. Yeah.
No, it's you are going to lose weight, but the first time you put carbohydrates back in, you will gain a pretty good amount of weight, because remember I said the word is carbohydrate.
So this is fascinating. Is that why if you eat a big plate of pasta and you haven't been eating pasta, you add far more weight on than I had?
You hold
no
on to
idea.
the fluids. Yep. Yeah, the body wants carbohydrates. The body wants glucose. The body wants to keep you alive. And we can manipulate all we want. And we'll get short-term benefits, which again gets back to that, it bothers me so much that people get these short-term benefits, but then they can't they either achieve their weight or they can't keep it up, and then the weight comes back because the body now gets the fuel it wants. We've had conversation over the years whether, in fact, every time you go on a diet, you change your metabolism. In other words, slow it down. And I don't know that we know the answer still, but we do know that when people go on and off diets over time, they do tend to gain more and have a harder time losing each time they go on a new one. So something's happening metabolically.
The really sad and somewhat terrifying thing I heard on the podcast that I was listening to today was almost no diets that anybody does keeps weight off for more than 2 years, which to me sounds like a prison sentence in that once you've put on weight, you're always going to be heavy. You're always going to eventually yo-yo back. Is that true?
Well, the key there is the use of that word is truly on diets. So in other words, diets don't work. Healthy eating plans do.
When you say healthy eating plans, are you talking about what weightlifters refer to as tracking macros, making sure they get their proteins, carbs, fats, and their calories?
No.
No? I thought I was dead on this. So what do you mean then?
A healthy eating plan is, again, where you look at, okay, what does the body need to be healthy? It needs the majority of your calories to come from carbohydrates. Now, we can argue, is majority 51 or is it 65? You need adequate protein. And again, depending upon age, you look at that older adult, it's going to be more gram per body weight than the younger adult.
Oh,
and
really? The older adults need more protein?
Yeah.
Even though it's harder to process?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, well, we lose more.
Okay.
We lose it, so we need to put more in. Obviously your athletes need more. And then we need a minimum of 10% of our calories from fat just to get the essential fatty acids. But then fat becomes that variable of, do you want to try to lose weight? Do you need to gain weight? What do you need for flavor? Today you're going to have a birthday party. You eat more. So it's meeting those nutrient needs comes first. And then it's a matter of, all right, let's talk about what you're doing, how much you need, and what do you like to eat. This counting of macro stuff, it's probably contributing to some of our disordered eating because people are so obsessed with the numbers that they aren't paying attention to intuitive eating. They aren't paying attention to, am I enjoying what I'm eating? All they're worried about is the numbers. And then the other part of it is, who told them what their number was? Some book? Or did they really sit down with a registered dietitian and talk about, this is my exercise, this is how old I am? I mean, think about the 18 and 19-year-old football players at WashU. Their calorie need, their protein need is significantly different than the seniors on the team or the swimmers and divers.
Just even 4 years?
Teenage boys. Teenage boys are like burning engines.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you feed a teenage boy and they burn more calories. So, you can't even look at the baseball team, the football team, the basketball team, the cross-country team as a whole, because each individual is different. And I know that complicates the situation because, yes, there's 100,000 RDs in the United States, but there's obviously a lot more people than that.
People, right, yeah.
So we aren't going to all be able to meet individually. But this is where I come back to, we need to look at, how does that my plate look? And does your plate look like that? So one of the things I've done over the last couple of years is I meet with the St. Louis County Police Academy recruits in their basic training to talk about basic nutrition. And that's the thing I really convey to them is, all right, does your plate look like 1/2 is fruits and vegetables?
There's no
right.
way.
Exactly.
If you're sitting in a car and you're trying to get fast food, I mean, unless you're packing a lettuce salad.
Yeah. And for the majority of Americans, I mean, our intake still remains a piece and a half of fruit a day and about a cup of vegetables. And it should be 2 pieces of fruit and 3 cups of vegetables. So the majority of us still don't get that basic what we need. Now, if you look at that plate, the other thing you will see is, where on that plate are the cookies and the chips and the soft drinks they're not there. But of course, where are they on our plates?
Yeah, they're there.
Yeah.
So let's, you bring up an interesting point. Let's talk about big sugar and the, the idea that there are groups of dietitians that have been paid off to do for the soda industry what I don't know what 9 out of 10 doctors did for Camel cigarettes. What's going on there? What's the case that people are making against Big Sugar, and what are your thoughts on it?
Well, there's a lot of cases being made, whether it is because of the healthcare professional connection to, or whether it is, that sugar is killing all of us. Everybody's kind of in a different place on it. I think in my mind as a registered dietitian, the issue is a very, very simple issue: added sugars. So now that becomes, soft drinks, it becomes sports drinks, it becomes energy drinks, obviously cookies, candies, all of that. Added sugars. They should only go into that eating plan after you've met all those other things. And they should never be more than 10% of your calories. It's quantity. It's quantity. Again, when you look at your plate, do you see half of it is fruits, vegetables, a quarter is whole grains, and a quarter is lean protein? If the answer is no, then added sugars don't fit in your eating plan until you get that plate to measure up. That's what I worry about. I think what we're doing is another perfect example of good food, bad food, diet mentality. Sugar's bad, it's going to kill you. Fat's bad, it's going to kill you. It doesn't work. We've seen that. It doesn't work. As soon as you tell the young child, you can't have that, what does the young child want? We're no different. We're just big children. So, I think we need to recognize we have a lot in our diet. We need to cut it down. We need to make it either only special occasion or very minimal if we have to do it on a daily basis. I over the years would see people who would drink a diet soft drink every morning. Excuse me, not a diet, because that obviously wouldn't be a sugar issue, would drink a soda every morning for the caffeine. All right, they're doing the caffeine. Other people are doing coffee. Can we make it work? Yeah, you can. But that's not where the problem is. It's, the big gulps, it's the big this, it's all of those things. Now, in terms of your first premise of, the partnership
the dietitians being a part of it, yeah.
There's integrity, of course, up there, number one. And number two is industry partnerships are to everybody's advantage as long as integrity rules it. So in other words, the food industry is going to sell food. Would you rather they partner with people who help them develop foods and shape their messaging based upon the science or based upon what the food industry thinks is right? But that assumes that everybody's playing their role appropriately. There's no question a lot of people have challenged when we were the American Dietetic Association, and actually it was the year I was president, we had partnerships with Coca-Cola and Pepsi at that point. Pepsi now is a bigger arm, and I'm drawing blank on, all the food companies.
Oh yeah, giant conglomerations. Yeah.
We're getting fewer and fewer, and that was a question I fielded from a reporter was, well, obviously, they've bought you, and you're going to say whatever you want them to say, and the answer was no. We had very clear guidelines. If you want to be a partner of the American Dietetic Association, and it holds true as the Academy, we will partner, we will review the body of evidence, but we're going to shape the messages. You're not going to shape the messages. You're not going to use our logos. We're not you. You're you. We're just a partner to help the consumer understand what to do. And in fact, at the time, the Coca-Cola company gave a good donation to the Academy's Evidence Analysis Library to assess a question on sugar. And the answer didn't come out quite like they wanted. But the answer came out the way the science said it.
So what was it? What was the question?
I'm blanking on the question. It related to the impact of sugar consumption, but I don't remember exactly. It didn't come out the way they thought it would.
And they didn't say, give us our money back or anything?
Nope. And that's what's important. If you partner with anybody and you sell your soul.
Yeah.
So integrity is key. Yes, there have been scientists who have sold their souls, and it's unfortunate. And some of them were very good scientists. And it's definitely hurt their reputations and their names. And, who knows why people do what they do.
So you're no longer president of the academy,
No.
and but you're still in it.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
but what are the current controversies that sit inside of the academy? You have 100,000 people talking about the very core of life that is food. What are the arguments that are raging right now?
A lot of them do revolve around things we've discussed. The intuitive anti-diet. There's a movement called Health at Every Size. And last fall at our annual meeting, there was actually a debate between a researcher in weight management and what does the body of evidence show as it relates to weight management, whether it is effectiveness, whether it is impact on creating eating disorders, and then the Health at Every Size part of it. And the goal of the session was really to look at, okay, what is your science? What is your science? What are your outcome measures? How do you know?
And when you're saying health at every size, you're saying that there are some dietitians saying...
It's a bigger movement than just dietitians.
Okay, so tell me what it is.
Health at Every Size is a movement that started... It's not new, maybe 20 years, maybe even more. And their focus is good. In other words, you can be healthy at any body size if... Back to your 3 words of earlier, back to if you are eating the right things to be healthy, you're working out to be fit. Maybe the happy part doesn't fit.
Yeah,
but
happy,
it's
wealthy,
that
and
piece.
fit. Yep. Mm-hmm.
It's that piece of really looking at making sure you're getting what your body needs to be healthy. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think we all espouse for that. The thing that the debate focused on was there is evidence to show that too much body fat increases your risk for disease. It's there. You can't ignore it. So we have to acknowledge that if you're carrying extra body weight and you aren't focused on, are your joints okay? Are you paying attention to your blood sugar levels and all of that? You're putting an individual at risk, and we as professionals need to help those people. So this is a big area of conversation. It's ongoing. The Academy partners with the Obesity Society, which is all the researchers in the obesity world, to really try to develop messaging that acknowledges, yeah, you can be healthy, but we've got to talk about how you get there, and we've got to talk about, is there a point at which, for an individual, too much body fat is not healthy? We can't ignore it.
How does the academy handle, or I don't even know how to ask this because body weight is so personal, right? And it is such a touchstone. But if you think about the dietitian that is really overweight and they're trying to counsel people on good nutrition,
it's always been an issue.
Really?
Yeah, it's always been an issue. It's very similar to, when they say the physician who would tell you to stop smoking as he was smoking his cigarette. That happened for years.
Yeah.
And many dietitians who are in that position, they have done a couple of things. Number one, they've been very self-disclosure honest. I know what you're going through because I'm going through it myself. I struggle with X, Y, and Z as well, but I can help you, and maybe you'll do better than I have done. So that's one way of, I think, right or wrong, some dietitians who carry more body fat than they'd like choose not to go into the patient world. So that's a way of, managing it. But the Academy has a position paper on weight management. We have a specialty group on weight management. I just finished my year as chair of that group. And, we really have some excellent research and some excellent researchers who've looked at, again, the body of evidence. That's what's so important. Don't take single studies and go, oh, there's the answer to my question. I'm going to do that. What does the body of evidence show us? And it still shows us that there is a point at which people carry too much body fat, and it does have negative health implications.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, you can't go. My wife's a physical therapist, as you know, and there's no way you can go out and jog on joints if you have all that added weight, and in addition to whatever. I just, it's such a difficult thing because I imagine signing up to be maybe a different way to look at it is that oftentimes people go towards the field where they learned the most or they had a person make the biggest impact. But if you go into that and you say, I'm going to be a dietitian, people are going to judge you every aspect of what you eat and how you look and how you all of those. You're signing up for a hell of a thing.
Well, no question there. And it's been, I'd have to stop and think how many years. But, I was on TV in St. Louis for...
oh, man, do it on TV.
Yeah.
That'd be way hard.
15 years-ish, something to that effect. And the worst example of what you just stated, I was at, there's a small market in our community where, you can run in and get stuff as opposed to going to the big supermarkets. So I was in and I was grabbing some stuff, and I don't even remember what the food was that I've putting out there on the belt, but it was something that maybe didn't fit my plate. And the person behind me said something to the effect of, "Oh my, I didn't think you would be buying those kinds of things." But wait, the best part was my answer. "Oh, they're for my children." I was like, did I just say that? But yeah, you're right. You're a constant scrutiny. You go out to eat with people and people will say, "Oh, I better not eat that. The dietitian's here," or whatever it might be. But, I guess you kind of get over it. Sometimes you use it as an opportunity for conversation. I think the thing that the profession has looked at of late, and there actually have been some studies in our journal on it, just as you said about, people who've worked out with a PT often end up going to school to be a PT. We have dietitians who have dealt with eating disorders who've gone into the field. And that's a bit of a concern because eating disorders are for life. They're not temporary. You break an ankle, a hip, or whatever, it heals. Eating disorders don't usually go away.
I had a math teacher that one time told her class, 6th grade math teacher, that said, "The reason I'm a math teacher is because when I was your age, I hated math and I figured out how to do it. So I thought I'd be your math teacher." And all of us were like, "Oh, great." Now she's going to make us as miserable. But in this case, that would either be the greatest blessing because you've put yourself in a community and now you're surrounded by the research and you see what other people, or the most horrible curse because now you're confronting the same demons other people are confronting, you're seeing too.
Right. And that's been the challenge, with the dietitians. And that was what the study basically looked at was, what impact has it had on them as they look at practice. And, obviously, just like everything else, for some dietitians, it has worked out great. For others, it has only caused them to continue to sit in their eating disorder. But you could take that out of the profession and say that anyway.
Right.
Because it is a psychological disorder, and without the proper help, they're going to sit in that disorder.
Yeah, that's right. And constant maintenance. So a total non sequitur, what should people that want to lose weight know about alcohol and alcohol consumption?
It's a tricky one to answer right now, truthfully. The simple answer is alcohol is metabolized just like fat, so therefore it goes to storage. So the more alcohol, the more you store.
Wait, so if I drink a beer...
Yeah, it's metabolized just like fat.
Not like... So it's not
well,
like...
the carbohydrate in the beer and the little bit in the wine will be metabolized as other carbohydrates are.
So the sugar that's in there is
alcohol.
all going to go like carbohydrates, but the alcohol that's there, whatever percentage it is, goes to your liver and turned into fat.
Yep.
Or processed as fat.
It's processed as fat.
So what does that
more
mean?
of it gets stored. Alcohol, of course, has more calories per gram than other carbohydrates. So that's the other thing people need to remember. It is more calorie rich, so to speak. The other thing, though, that's looked at right now, it's actually an area of research right now. And I think one of the 2020 questions is on alcohol. I'm almost positive. To the point of, is it contributing to our obesity epidemic? So as we look at it, it does provide that added calorie piece that you need to stop and think about. Can you afford those added calories? The nutrients that come with it are limited to none. Yes, if you do red wine and even white wine for that matter, you are getting some of the phytonutrients because, of course, it comes from a grape. If you do beer, okay, there's some hops in there, but the amounts, of course, are nothing like eating grapes or, eating wheat or that type of thing. And clearly, if you do hard liquor, there's really not much nutrient value. So it needs to be looked at in that same kind of empty calorie way. Can you afford those calories? With that said, of course, that's where we get back to, yeah, but I enjoy. Well, that's where we then get to what are the health implications. We know from most of the body of evidence, and this has been in the dietary guidelines for every bit of 20 years, if not more, alcohol does have some pretty significant negative impacts. I mean, women probably shouldn't have more than 1 drink per day, and men it's 2.
Really, to what effect when you say?
Well, it's tied to the impact on blood sugar, so the impact on insulin. It's tied to, of course, alcohol as an irritant and the potential of carcinogen in the mouth. It's tied to the heart piece. Yes, wine in the French paradox, did show a benefit to heart disease, but the alcohol piece, and it's probably, like we discussed earlier, this whole gut microbiome thing. What's the alcohol really doing to the gut microbiota, and is that having the effect on disease in the body? So there's a lot of complexity, but it is an area that's being looked at. And a study recently, and I'm drawing a blank on where the study was, but it really did look at, maybe it doesn't belong in the diet because of the potential health implications. Clearly, that's not going to happen. So, the advice then becomes, it needs to be a part of your diet. You need to think about the quantities in your diet. And then, of course, having worked with the college population, it always was about, and you need to think about the behavioral consequences of overconsumption. Because, of course, too much alcohol, we know it impairs function, it impairs, so many physical movements, and that's, of course, when people get in trouble.
Do you think most people recognize how big of an impact, how many calories they're taking in by how much they drink?
No. Alcohol is like so many other things, whether it is, the birthday cake or whether it is the candies you keep in your drawer. It's that, there's not that much, it doesn't count. We do a disconnect with it. I think the only time I've seen people really think about it, it's that disordered eating behavior. Thursday night is the night the college kids go out. So on Thursdays.
Well, Thursday and then Friday and then Saturday. But
well, Thursday's the big one.
The one they start on,
right,
yes.
Right. So Thursday, I just won't eat because I'm going to drink.
Oh,
which,
man.
Of course, only makes the drinking worse in terms of, the impact. See, that's the other thing people don't know is alcohol drops blood sugar. So that, when you drink too much, yes, you're intoxicated. But some of
Is that why you always get hungry then while you're...
Yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah. But it's also some of the, when people get into the kind of stumbling behavior and you're going, you only had a drink, you only had 2 drinks. Well, if it's on an empty stomach, it drops the blood sugar because it's, again, the way it's metabolized, it affects the blood sugar more quickly. So, people have been stopped when they, aren't really alcohol intoxicated. So in other words, not above the 0.08, but it's because they didn't eat. So the effect was more.
I had no idea. I'm very, very glad I asked this. So speaking of blood sugar, I've had a chance to learn a little bit about what happens when somebody gets diabetes and they're taking a needle and they're pumping insulin into their body. But let's take a step back and you can probably give a better explanation. One, why does somebody develop diabetes? There's 2 types. And then what's going on when they're giving themselves insulin?
Well, when you look at diabetes, all of it is a metabolic disorder. So there is a genetic component. There is heredity involved. When you look at type 1, which we used to call juvenile onset because we thought it would only happen in young years. We now know it can happen anywhere in the lifespan. And basically what happens in type 1 is the pancreas is no longer producing the insulin.
And what does insulin do?
Insulin is what, in simple layman's terms, is what when glucose is in your bloodstream and it comes to a cell, insulin opens the door so the glucose can go in the cell rather than staying in your blood sugar and then coming out when we urinate.
And that comes primarily from carbohydrates?
Yeah, the glucose from your carbohydrates. So, when we eat, if we don't have diabetes, our body recognizes the presence of carbohydrates. Of course, at this point, they're glucose in your bloodstream. You release the insulin. It goes to all the cells in your body, opens, again, the door to let the glucose in. So now the cell gets its energy and you feel good. Remember, we talked about blood sugar up, blood sugar down. Mm-hmm. So the insulin down here lets the glucose go in and your blood sugar comes back to more of a normal level. Type 2 is when the pancreas is still making some insulin. It just may not be enough, or it may not be released appropriately. So it might release it when there's no food, or it might release some when there's food and then a lot later. So in other words, it's just not working the way it should. So there's a lot of glucose, the blood sugar, staying in your blood as opposed to going into your cells, which is why people get a lot of lethargy. People often will talk about, as we said earlier, the mind fog, but also they'll notice it in their vision. They'll notice, I just don't feel very good. In type 1, because there is no insulin, one of the classic ways of diagnosis is you see weight loss because your cells don't get the glucose, so you lose weight. And then, of course, the real classics are you start getting a lot of thirst and you're drinking a lot of water.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
But that's because you're losing your cells and you got to flush them out of the body.
Oh, wow.
So see, really it's the impact on the cells, and then you've got to get that water gone, or get the water to get the waste gone. Type 2, those people tend to be a little bit overweight, but again, it's a genetic piece. So in other words, if you gained weight, you're not automatically going to get type 2 diabetes. If you gain enough, you probably will struggle with some blood sugar issues, but to diagnose it as type 2 diabetes, there's some, again, criteria to make that real diagnosis. But the reason it is associated with weight is fat cells. Remember on muscle cells, I said the insulin opens the door and the glucose goes in. Muscle cells don't have any doors.
Oh, and fat cells, you mean?
Sorry, thank you I'm glad you're listening. Fat cells don't have any receptor sites, so no doors. So there's no way to get insulin into a fat cell. So therefore, the blood sugar just keeps circulating through the body. So now, of course, you go and you get your blood done and your blood sugar's way high. And that's because your insulin's just not working right, or there's not enough to get what you're eating into the muscle cells.
Interesting. Wait, and that's because the fat cells cover over the muscle cells, and then
It's
they can't get
the balance of the two.
Okay.
It's you're carrying more body fat than you've got muscle. So even if the insulin's taken it into the muscle cells, you've got all these cells that aren't nourished, and they continue to yell for food, and they want more food, and you keep eating, and it doesn't work, and it's the imbalance.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So a vicious cycle then.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right.
So when somebody takes an insulin needle out and they pump in some insulin into their body, what then is happening?
Well, if they're doing it still by needle, they have to time it with their food. So they have to do it about 30 minutes before they're going to eat so that the insulin is there and ready when the glucose comes in to put it in the cells. If they did the insulin after the meal, they're going to have some problem with some of that glucose being absorbed. Many people now with type 1 use a pump. And the pump is an automatic programmed release of insulin. So it gives them more flexibility on eating. So they don't have, they still need to manage it because you can't be all over the place. But in the past, some people at the beginning still use the needle. So as they're learning. You have to plan out, when am I going to eat breakfast? What am I going to eat? Am I taking enough insulin to match what I'm going to eat? Same thing for lunch, same thing for dinner. So it becomes very challenging. In type 2, you either are using an oral medication, which kind of is a booster for your insulin. You're definitely using diet, and you're using exercise. Because, again, you want to try to lose the fat cells, boost the muscle cells, and, drop your weight if you can.
So very, very common thought that I've heard on podcasts talking about diabetes and insulin is that as soon as you get on the insulin system, you are both going to, A, gain weight, and B, never be able to get out of it. Is that true?
Well, the first one, the gain weight, is a little bit true. The second one is definitely true. If you're a type 1 diabetic, you're not making any insulin. You have to have insulin. You can't live without it.
Okay, and then what about in type 2 diabetes?
Type 2, yes, some of them will use insulin. No, type 2 diabetes, many people can get that back under control.
Oh, wow.
Many people
It's
can.
the most hopeful thing you've said so far today.
Oh, darn. On the first one, on type 1, about the gain weight, remember what I said, though, with type 1, before they get diagnosed, often what happens is they lose weight. So you start taking insulin, you will gain weight, but that's because now your cells are getting their energy. See, what was happening before is you were starving because there was nothing to put energy into your cell. Energy cannot go into a muscle cell without insulin. It's not going to happen. So you're going to continue to eat your muscle cells to get that energy. So you're starving the body.
Okay.
And that's why they lose weight before they're diagnosed. And then when they start taking the insulin, they'll gain weight, but it's because the body's getting healthy again.
This is such an interesting thing, and I see it a lot, but I actually didn't even realize you could take insulin by pill. So that's
It's not an insulin as such. It's called metformin, and there may be others right now. That's the one I'm most familiar with. It's a booster to your insulin, so it helps your insulin work better. It helps your insulin act when it should act. Now, insulin almost always, again, I could be wrong, but almost always it's got to be the injectable or the pump, which is injectable too.
Are you familiar with the concept, the Dunning-Kruger effect? This is where...
I just heard that.
So
Remind me.
I talk about it a lot. I get invited out to talk about, well, how do people know what they know? But the Dunning-Kruger effect is the tendency for human beings to vastly overestimate how much confidence they should have in their expertise. So you read 1 or 2 books and your confidence spikes, and then you read a few more, and all of a sudden you start saying, "Wait a second! The more I learn, the less I feel like I know." So their confidence goes way down, and eventually it goes up. And I can tell you that I absolutely suffer from the Dunning-Kruger effect around nutrition, and so it's been a great pleasure to talk with you. And I think there's probably a lot of people that are wondering right now. At what point do I decide I should go pay the money to go see a dietitian? So what would be as the former president of the academy, what is your way to describe when somebody should go talk to a dietitian? And then what should they look for when they do?
I would say one thing first. I would say you can go for free to eatright.org, which is the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics website. And there is a lot of information on there. So if you just need all of that, what's right, that's a simple click on the web. If you really want to do that, sit down, plan it out, figure out what I need to do. Again, you can go to eatright.org, and there is a link on there called Find a Nutrition Professional, and you enter your zip code and what you're looking for, and you'll get a list of dietitians who see individual clients, so you can find someone in your area.
What should somebody expect to pay to see a dietitian?
I think it's all over the place right now, so I'm not sure I can even quote for you, because of course it's geography as well as need, and then the individual dietitian. If they're in a physician's office, it's a little bit different than if they're a standalone office.
But I mean, I guess maybe just a ballpark. This is $50 an hour. It's a $200 an hour. Where would you put it? Is that a right ballpark, you think?
It's probably I'm not sure for an individual we'd go as high as 200.
Okay.
It's in this area. You go to New York, San Francisco, LA, it probably is that for sure. Okay. But my guess would be, as we sit here in the Midwest, you're looking at, somewhere in that 75 to 150 for an hour. A lot of dietitians will do a bundle, sort of like cable. They'll do a bundle where you can commit to doing one visit and 2 or 3 follow-ups, which of course are extremely important, and a lot of people don't want to do them because it's extra cost. Mm-hmm. But that way they can kind of spread the cost so it doesn't feel as expensive. Mm-hmm. What you want to go to a dietitian for, again, is I want to develop an eating plan that I enjoy and that I can stick to and that'll help me be the healthiest me that I can be. Now, clearly, if you have a disease, hypertension, cardiovascular, cholesterol or diabetes, then make sure you look for a dietitian who specializes in that. Not all of us do.
Okay.
I would not see someone with kidney disease because I haven't done that since my internship. Doing eating disorders and cardiovascular, great, but don't bring me, liver disease. So make sure you look at what people specialize in. Ask if they have any sort of insurance. Many diseases are not covered, but it's worth an ask. The more a patient asks, the more documentation we can provide to insurance companies that it's needed.
Okay.
And then when you do the visit, go in prepared with I want to, whatever. I want to learn how to cook. I want to learn how to put less salt on. Know what your specific goals are. Don't just go in and say, I want to eat better. What does that mean? Or I want to lose weight. Is it weight or is it I'd like some muscle mass?
Right.
Have your head on in terms
Right.
of what you're looking for. Generally speaking, a first visit is going to be an hour because you should get a history. So tell me about yourself. Let's develop a plan, and then we go from there. And that takes about an hour. Follow-ups are much shorter, maybe a half an hour. And I would always say try to do at least one just because change is hard.
And a mom that's got some kids at home and wanting to do better could come in and talk with the
Yeah.
dietitian about setting up that's an interesting.
Yeah.
As somebody that has a lot of friends that are becoming parents, I know that's a big question.
It
for a lot
is.
of people.
It's very confusing. It's very overwhelming. Some of the hospitals have outpatient clinics where you can do it as well. So, if you are looking at pediatrics, you might look at your local children's hospital to see, do they just have a clinic where I can go in and talk to the dietitian? And that might be more economical. It might also be easier if you're carrying along a bunch of little ones.
Yeah. And so to close out, you are actually on social media. At least I found you on Twitter. So why don't you tell everybody what your Twitter handle is about and what types of things you share there so they would know whether or not you're the type of person they want to follow?
Yeah, I am on social media as time allows. So on Twitter, well, actually Twitter and Facebook, they're both the same. I just use what is now my business, CB, and then Diekman. So hashtag CBDiekman.
I'll put a link to it. Yeah.
Okay. And, my goal is to share the science of nutrition in easy to use, whether it's a soundbite or whether it's a link off of Facebook. It is about getting people to the right information as opposed to some of the other stuff that's out there. And yes, my areas tend to be cardiovascular, eating disorders, sports. I worked with the university athletes. I worked with that football team when they were in St. Louis.
Oh, you did? You worked for the Rams?
Yeah,
Wow.
I work for the Rams. So, I do sports nutrition as well. I am credentialed in sports dietetics. So those are probably my big areas. But as you know, I am a member of the lead network for Bear. And of course, a lot of people jump on that one immediately, like, number one, what is that? And number two, how could you do that? And Lead Network, of course, is leaders engaged in advancing the dialogue. And that is such an important thing. We have to talk about where our food comes from, how our farmers produce the food that we need, and how are we going to feed the world when our population goes from our current 7-8 billion to, up there at, what is the latest projection, 12 or 15 billion, something to that effect, in the role of technology. We have to talk about this.
Well, that would be a great thing for you to come back on the show at some point and talk about. Just as one little aside, a lot of people probably don't know that Bayer bought Monsanto. So Bayer is a large agriculture company in addition to being in the pharmaceuticals world. And I used to work there for a brief time with Bayer, but for a longer time with Monsanto.
Yep.
In any case, I'm very, very glad that you came by
Thank you.
today.
This
and
was
I
great.
will definitely have you again. So thank you
Sounds
so
good.
much
Thanks,
for jumping
Jens.
into the water. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for the interview today. I hope you enjoyed it. I know that I learned quite a bit. If you did, I hope you'll consider subscribing and hitting the like button. Make sure you put comments in about what you found interesting and if there's anything I can do to make the interviews better or more informative. And definitely let me know if there's anybody you think I should be interviewing. I try to do all these interviews in the St. Louis area, so if you know anybody that's already here or somebody that might be swinging by, let me know. I actually don't know who's going to be next week's interview, so you'll have to tune in. I'll definitely throw it up on Twitter whenever I find out. But I'm looking forward to it, and we'll see you next week.